Need some new Modern Horizons cards? Well, you can pre-order them from our sponsor Card Kingdom by heading over to cardkingdom.com. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Modern Horizons 2 spoilers. And I know, it's a holiday over here in the US, but spoilers never stop, holiday or no, and we actually have a ton of cards to talk about today. Another big spoiler day, kicking off the second week, partial week of Modern Horizons 2 spoilers, so we should probably jump right into it, start talking sweet new cards, and first up today, oh my god, we have a powerful black mythic, Archon of Cruelty. So 8 mana 6/6 flyer. When it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacks a creature or planeswalker, discards a card and loses 3 life, you draw a card and gain 3 life. Oh my goodness, is that a lot of abilities. If you look at this, this is like if you took Uro and Kroxa and mashed them together on an 8 mana 6/6 flying body that doesn't care about escaping or any of that stuff, that's kind of what you're getting. All of their abilities mashed together except the extra land drop. It compares a little bit to like a mini Cruel Ultimatum that gives you a massive body in return. This card is very powerful. I think this might be one of, if not the best card for the new non-legendary Reanimator deck. Of course, maybe there's like some combo you can set up. People have been talking about Protein Hulk combos, but outside of like reanimating a combo, if you're just reanimating something that's big and offers a lot of value, I think that Archon of Cruelty might be at the top of the list for the Persist Unmarked Grave style deck. And it's especially scary if you could cheat it into play with haste. Like, I'm picturing Through the Breach or like Whip of Erebos. Can you imagine? Like, what happens if you threw the Breach this into play? You're gaining 6 life, your opponent's losing 6 life, they're sacking 2 things, you're drawing 2 cards, they're discarding 2 cards. That is absolutely insane. That's so much value. Of course, if you're Through the Breaching, you could just put Emrakul into play and that just wins the game, which is probably better. But maybe some sort of like Whip of Erebos plan, maybe as a backup Through the Breach target to Emrakul and Grizzlebrand. It is a really, really strong card. I don't think it's impossible that people might try to hardcast this. It would definitely take a specific deck, Cabal Coffers plus Urborg, or maybe Nykthos Mono Black Devotion, but once this card's on the battlefield, it is absolutely absurd. It is so powerful. In Commander, the thing I want to do most with this card is get it under a Mimic Vat. Could you imagine this under a Mimic Vat? Mimic Vat, for 3 mana, lets you make a token copy of what it has exiled, and that comes into play with haste, so you're getting the same loop we talked about, where this comes into play, your opponent's got to sack 2 things, they're going to lose 6 life, they're going to discard 2 cards, you're going to draw 2 cards, you're going to gain 6 life, and you can do that every single turn for 3 mana. That is absolutely absurd. I think this goes in essentially every Reanimator Commander deck. Like, if you're playing Chainer or Nethroi or Tneb or Corridor or any sort of reanimation deck, why wouldn't you play that? It's just so much value. So I love Archon of Cruelty. I think it's powerful enough to be a modern reanimation target, specifically because it's non-legendary. We've been talking about throughout spoiler season the non-legendary reanimation theme and how it means you can't just grab Grizzlebrand, you can't just grab Iona, you can't just grab Elish Norn. Well, Archon of Cruelty is one of the best things that's not legendary that you can reanimate, and there's other shenanigans as well. This card, super strong. Of course, 8 mana means you're gonna have to cheat it into play, maybe ramp into it with Nykthos or Cabal Coffers or something, but once it comes down, this is going to create an unbeatable amount of value really quickly. We also got Nettlecyst, an interesting new living weapon. So 3 mana equipment. Living weapon, so it comes into play with a germ token, a Phyrexian germ token now. And the equip creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact or enchantment you control. Equip is 2, so essentially, by itself, this card isn't all that exciting. It's an equipment, which is an artifact, so you're going to get a 1/1 for 3. That's not all that great. However, this compares to a couple of really powerful cards. It has the same text as All That Glitters, and All That Glitters has proven itself to be a powerful finisher in various artifact decks, various Boggle style decks, and Nettlecyst, for 1 more mana, is making the creature to go along with it, so even if you don't have a creature on the battlefield, you still are going to get this massive threat. Also, sort of like a Cranial Plating, of course, it's more to equip, you can't do the instant speed shenanigans, it costs more to cast, but it's giving you +1/+1 rather than +1/+0, and it comes along with a creature, which is really huge. So Nettlecyst, it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this card. If it's going to work in Modern, My guess is going to be some sort of Affinity style deck. Affinity has kind of been on the outs ever since Mox Opal got banned, but maybe this can bring it back to prominence, along with Ornithopters, Memnite, Steel Overseals, all those shenanigans. My only concern is, if you look at Affinity or like Hardened Scale style decks, many of those decks are built around Arcbound Ravager, sacrificing your board to put all the counters on like one creature and one-shot your opponent. Arcbound Ravager, not really a combo with Nettlecyst. Nettlecyst wants a ton of artifacts on the battlefield. Arcbound Ravager wants to sacrifice those artifacts for value, so it might be too much of a non-bow. That is a little bit of a concern. The other place I would definitely consider playing this is in Hammer Time. Hammer Time, I love having a living weapon in the deck. Just one living weapon that I can get with Stoneforge Mystic if I don't have any other creatures, and then I got something I put the hammer on. A creature that's tutorable by all your equipment stuff's really good, and Nettlecyst would work well with what the deck is trying to do. It's going to be really, really big. However, Hammer Time is a Lurrus deck now, with Lurrus only letting you play permanents that cost 2 or less. You would have to drop the companion to play the Nettlecyst, so it might not be worth it there as well. So I feel like this is a card that's really close in Modern. It's really, really close to being good enough. Maybe it will be good enough, but there's just a couple of little things, like the non-bow with Arcbound Ravager, or the fact that decks that would want to play Lurrus and would have to give that up, that make me think it might be a near miss. On the other hand, if you're playing a go-wide artifact style commander deck, this seems really, really strong, like Osgir, or Sai, or Traxos. This is going to be really big. You can easily move it around if the Germ token dies. So Nettle says, we're going to have to wait and see. I feel like this is really close to being a Modern playable equipment, but it might just barely miss. But regardless, it should at least be good in Artifact Commander decks. Next up, we have Thought Monitor, another new artifact card. So Thought Monitor, 7 mana, 6 in a blue. You get a 2/2, doesn't sound too appealing. Artifact construct, but it has affinity for artifacts. So if you get 6 artifacts on the battlefield, this is going to be a single blue. It has flying, and when it enters a battlefield, you draw 2 cards. So Thought Monitor calls back to Thought Cast, a very powerful artifact card draw spell. One of the engines of old school affinity style decks, just a 1 mana draw 2. Thought Monitor can be the same thing. You do need 2 more artifacts on the battlefield, but you also get a 2/2 flyer along with 2 cards in your hand. So the good news is Thought Monitor seems like a mostly better version of a card that used to be really good. The bad news is Affinity hasn't been very good in Modern since Mox Opal got banned, and even when Affinity was good, Thought Cast was kind of hit or miss. People didn't necessarily play it. So is Thought Monitor going to make it in Modern? The thing that makes me think there's a chance is we had a bunch of new artifact lands, and the artifact lands do power this up. If you can consistently get it down to 1 mana early in the game, it is a very powerful card. 1 mana draw 2 and a 2/2 body is really, really good. The problem is Modern is fast. Even if you're casting this for 3 mana, 4 mana, 5 mana, it's not all that appealing. You really want to get down to the 1 or 2 mana range. In an Affinity style deck, maybe the artifact lands will make it possible. So I think wait and see. My concern isn't that Thought Monitor isn't good enough for Modern. My concern is the deck that Thought Monitor would see play in, some sort of Affinity style deck, going to be good enough for Modern? However, in the meantime, it seems like another good card for Artifact Commander decks, especially if you're going wide like Psy Master Thopterus. Really want you to just cast a bunch of cheap artifacts to make a bunch of Thopters, which are artifacts. In that deck, Thought Monitor, going to be a cheap draw too. Brea makes a lot of artifacts. It works with Panharmonicon, which could show up in these shells to draw even more cards. So Thought Monitor, it's a sweet card. It calls back to a powerful card. It's got a shot in Modern if an Affinity style shell develops in the format. Worst case, gonna do some things in Commander. We also got, oh my god, Sythis, Hand of the Harvest, and this card is insane. So 2 mana, a green and a white. You get a 1/2 legendary enchantment creature, Nymph, and when you cast an enchantment spell, you gain a life and draw a card. This is our new Enchantress, and it is an insane Enchantress. Enchantress is one of the archetypes that it's benefited most from Modern Horizons to. It seems like Wizards wants to give it a shot to see play in Modern, and now, thanks to Sythis, along with Eidolon of Blossoms, along with Enchantress's presence, we have enough powerful enchantresses that themselves are enchantments that we can cut out all the chaff. We don't gotta play Sythis enchantment. We don't gotta play Satyr enchanter. We don't gotta play Mesa enchantress anymore. We can go all in on enchantresses that are also enchantments, so they trigger each other. Sythis is maybe the most powerful of the bunch. The downside is it is legendary, so you can't stack up multiples like Eidolon of Blossoms, Enchantress's Presence, and if you've ever played Enchantress, you really want as many enchantresses on the battlefield as possible. Like, being able to cast a single enchantment and draw 3 or 4 cards is when the deck is at its best. On the other hand, it does kind of naturally get around the legend problem, because if you draw extras, sure, you can't stack up on the battlefield, but you can still cast them, still trigger your enchantresses, gain some life, draw some cards. So this card is really, really strong. It compares sort of to Argothian Enchantress, probably the best Enchantress that has ever been printed. In Modern, Enchantresses start at 3 mana before Sythis. Now we have a 2 mana Enchantress, which is a huge, huge deal. Of course, Sythis doesn't protect itself in the same way Argothian Enchantress does with Shroud, but still, this is cheaper than the other Enchantresses that we have available, and the life gain is relevant. We've played Herald of the Pantheon in Enchantress decks before as like a ramp spell / life gain spell, and one of the things about Enchantress is it's not a fast deck. It's a deck that in the mid to late game generates overwhelming value, becomes almost unbeatable once you get things set up, but it does start off slow. You're setting up with some ramp spells, getting your Enchantresses down, and then once you get things set up, you can snowball. Sythis life gain, it might not look like much, but just gaining 2, 3, 4, 5 extra life across the course of the game is a really big deal against aggro, buying you maybe that 1 extra turn to get things set up and lock up the game. So I think Sythis is incredibly powerful for Modern. I think if there is an Enchantress deck, this is going to be not just part of it, but one of the reasons why the deck can exist. I cannot wait to build Enchantress. I hope it's good. The other thing is, this is a really good Commander card. While being legendary is a drawback in Modern, in Commander it's an upside, because this gives you a true green-white Enchantress Commander. Yes, we got like Tetsuva the Sunlit, which isn't very good in all honesty. Only draws you a card for the first enchantment you cast each turn, so no comboing off, snowballing. In a lot of ways, Sythis reminds me of Sram, one of the most played white commanders that draws your card whenever you cast an aura, equipment, or vehicle. Sythis does that for any Enchantress. It still just costs 2 mana, so it comes down early. So if you're playing traditional Enchantress, I think this is the new best commander for your deck. So Sythis, it's a home run. It is an all-star for Modern in Enchantress decks. It's going to be a popular new commander deck. Really, not much bad to say about this one. We also got Necrogoyf. So Necrogoyf, 5 mana, star 4 Lurgoyf. Its power is equal to the number of creature cards in all graveyard, and then at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player discards a card, and you can madness it into play for just 3 mana, 1 in double black. So Necrogoyf, it might remind you of Tarmogoyf, because, I mean, it's got Goyf in the name, and in some ways it does call back to Tarmogoyf with the graveyard theme, but really, this is a upgraded Mortivore, another Lurgoyf. Mortivore kind of has the same tax, except its power and toughness is equal to the number of creatures in all graveyards, which is actually a big drawback. With Mortivore, if your opponent plays a Rest in Peace, your Mortivore dies. Necrogoyf, obviously not going to be powerful if your opponent has a Rest in Peace, but at least it sticks around as a 0/4 to block, and then you also get Necrogen Miss as a bonus, making each player discard a card on their upkeep. That's going to empty your opponent's hand, and if you're playing Necrogoyf, you're most likely playing some sort of madness deck anyway, where discarding a card can actually be a big upside on your huge body. So as I mentioned, Necrogoyf, much better against Graveyard Hate than other versions of this effect, which does give it a chance in Modern. The question I have is, can we make a madness deck work? I feel like Necrogoyf, at 5 mana, it's not good. It's just straight up unplayable. On the other hand, at 3 mana, then you're actually in business. Coming down as a 3 mana 2/4 or 3/4 that's going to grow throughout the game, that's actually not a bad card. My question for Madness in Modern is, do we have enough good discard outlets? Maybe, like, we have some good one-shot discard outlets like Insolent Neonate, we have stuff like Smuggler's Copter, we have some repeatable ones like Una's Prowler, but they're 2 mana. So the question's going to be, can you find the right mixture of threats and discard outlets threats to make the Madness deck work. If you can, the reward is there. We got Asmore, we got Blazing Root Wallet, we got Fiery Temper. The threats exist to make a powerful Madness deck. If that deck works, I think the Necrogoyf is almost certainly going to be a part of it. So really sweet new take on Lurgoyf that I don't think is broken by any stretch, but in Madness in specific, probably has got a bit of a chance in Modern. Thanks to its 5 mana, meaning it dodges Fatal Push, its 4 toughness, meaning it dodges Lightning Bolt. Pretty resilient as long as you can stock your graveyard in Madness into play for just 3 mana. Next up, we got Search the Premises, a 4 mana white enchantment that says whenever a creature attacks you or a planeswalker you control, investigate. You get a clue token. So Search the Premises, this card isn't in the conversation for Modern. It's too slow. It doesn't do enough. However, it is an interesting commander card where it kind of compares a little bit to Smothering Tithe, the 4-mana enchantment that gives you repeatable value. Of course, Smothering Tithe offers ramp, while Search the Premises is giving you card draw. It also is a little bit like Ghostly Prison. I don't think this is as powerful as Smothering Tithe. Not trying to say that. It just reminds me of it as a 4-mana enchantment with repeatable value. Also kind of like a Ghostly Prison that isn't going to stop people from attacking you, but maybe discourage it. If you get attacked, you're at least going to get a clue, which you can turn into cards. The main reason I'm excited for Search the Premises is that white is just pitifully bad at drawing cards. Is this a great card draw spell? No, not really. Like, clues are expensive to crack, 2 mana for 1 card. It depends on your opponents to attack you to trigger, but white is just so bad at drawing cards. I think this could be a staple in mono white decks just because you don't have a ton of better options to generate card advantage, and card advantage is so important. So I think if you're playing a mono white deck, at least for me, I'm going to try to just put this in every mono white deck going forward and see what happens. See how it feels, see how many cards it draws me. Could it end up being not good enough? It's possible, but I lean towards any mono white deck wanting this card to have a source of card advantage. It goes up even further in value in specific decks though. Maybe you have enchantment synergies. Then it gets even better if you're playing Sythis or Estrid. Maybe you have decks that care about having a lot of artifacts on the battlefield, like Akiri gets pumped based on the number of artifacts you have, or Breya wants to sacrifice them. Ways that you could take advantage of these clue tokens that isn't just cracking them to draw a card. Then Search the Premises gets even better. So I like this card. No chance that this does anything in Modern, but in Commander, we might be looking at a new mono white staple. At a minimum, it's going to be worth trying because white is just not good at drawing cards. We also got a pretty insane black 2-drop in Dauthi Voidwalker. So Dauthi Voidwalker, double black mana for a 3/2 Dauthi Rogue. It has Shadow, which, if you're not familiar with Shadow, it's essentially like weird flying. It can't block or be blocked except by other creatures with Shadow, which in Modern essentially just means it's unblockable and can't block. And it has this static ability, which is essentially Lifeline of a Void. If a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, exile it with a Void counter instead, and then you can tap and sack it to choose one of the cards that you've exiled with a Void counter, and you can play it this turn without paying its mana cost. So Dauthi Voidwalker is like a very upgraded Inkfathom Infiltrator as a double black 2-drop that can't block or bleed block. You're getting an extra power and an extra toughness, plus you get a Leyline of the Void, plus you might be able to play one of those cards for free. This is like the most aggressive Hate Bear we've ever seen. A 3/2 unblockable Leyline of the Void on a stick. That is already a really powerful card. Of course, you could potentially live the dream. Like, hilariously, you play this on like turn 3 and then immediately Thoughtseize and hit your opponent's Emrakul or something, and that goes to exile with a Void counter, and you're like, maybe I will sack my Dauthi Voidstalker and cast this Emrakul without paying its mana cost. But really, I think you'll get value out of that second ability where you're stealing your opponent's cards even without building around it. Just like naturally, eventually your opponent's going to have something good go into the exile zone, and then you can cash this in to cast that card. It's also a rogue, which might be the most interesting aspect, and it does synergize really well with some of the other rogues. Like, this is a rogue that you can easily pick up to Zarazan because it's pretty much always going to be unblocked. It is an unblockable rogue for Una's black card to hit your opponent, make them discard cards. Those cards go into exile with a Void counter. You can later cast them. It pumps with Soaring Thought Thief. It triggers Thieves Guild Enforcer. So maybe we can see modern rogues actually be a thing. We've seen rogues go from like standard back to historic with Dauthi Voidwalker, can they make that jump back to Modern? I don't think it's impossible that they could. They are pretty close. Also could see playing some sort of ninja deck. Ninjas really want unblockable creatures for ninjutsu purposes. 2 mana is a little bit obnoxious. You really want unblockable 1-drop into a ninja, but still it could have some potential there. And I don't even know if you need to build around this. Like, maybe you could just play mono black aggro. Just curve out your Knight of the Even Legions into Rotting Regisards and Geralf's Messengers with some Thoughtseize as a backup, and you just play this because it's an unblockable 3-power threat that also has this Hateberry upside. It's an absolutely absurd Magic card, and even outside of Modern, I think this card could be very good in Commander. In Commander, people play big things, so you can steal bigger things. People don't play as much Graveyard Hate as they should. This is a fun way that you can incidentally have a Leyline of the Void in your deck. You can't really play Leyline of the Void because it doesn't do anything, but Dauthi Voidwalker, it's a Leyline of the Void that also might let you steal your opponent's sweet things. You can throw a sword on it because it can't be blocked because of Shadow. So I think it's definitely showing up in like Sen Triplets, Gonti, Dragonlord, Slumgar, any steal your stuff deck. But really, I think this is in the conversation for kind of a lot of different decks just because it's Graveyard Hate on a reasonable body that works well with equipment and has a fun ability stacked onto it. So I love Dauthi Voidwalker. This is a very powerful effect, a super aggressive hate bear that also can do some really hilarious things by stealing your opponent's card. So rogues in Modern, Commander decks everywhere, mono black aggro, mono black devotion, so many possibilities with this one. Next up, we got some more squirrel action with Chitterspitter. Not Chatterspitter, Chitterspitter this time. 3 mana artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you can sacrifice a token. If you do, put an acorn counter on it. Squirrels you control get +1/+1 for each acorn counter on Chitterspitter, and then you pay a green, tap it to make a 1/1 green squirrel token. So Chitterspitter, definitely a card geared for the squirrel deck, and it seems like a reasonable payoff if you're playing squirrels in Modern, in Commander, another way to buff your squirrels, which is pretty important because squirrels, you can make a lot of them, but they're not very big, so having a bunch of Anthem effects is going to be essential to making the tribe actually be able to kill anyone. Well, Chitterspitter, it's going to take a while to get going, but once it gets going, can potentially be giving your squirrels +3/+3, +5/5, +10/10. So definitely a cool option for Squirrel Tribal. Works really well with Squirrel Sanctuary. In specific, you can stack the token to trigger a Squirrel Sanctuary to replay it to make a token. So a nice little loop essentially where you can keep making tokens over and over again, powering up the rest of your squirrels. So Chitterspitter, outside of squirrels, doesn't really do much, but if you are playing squirrels, gonna be an easy inclusion in your deck in Commander for sure, and we'll probably play a copy or two in Modern Squirrels as well, which Modern Squirrels, again, I don't think it's a legit deck, not gonna be a top tier deck, but it does seem like a fun semi-competitive deck to build. We also got Bloodbraid Marauder, which is a really interesting card. So 2 mana, 3/1 Human Berserker. It can't block, and then it has Delirium where it has Cascade. So if you can get 4 different card types in your graveyard, it's a 2-drop 3/1 that cascades when it comes into play. The challenge is going to be turning on the Cascade mode. Can you get Delirium? If you can, this is incredibly powerful with free spells. If you look at the free spell decks that are using Cascade, they essentially can't play any 1 or 2 drops, or else they fizzle Cascade, because Cascade starts at 3 mana. Well, with Bloodbraid Marauder, you just got to cut out 1 drops. You can play all the 2 drops you want. However, I'm not sure it's going to be that easy to turn on Delirium. We've seen Grimflayer kind of have the same issue, and Grimflayer mills a bunch of cards to fill your graveyard to turn it on, especially if your restriction is, I can't play anything that's 0 mana or 1 mana outside of what I'm trying to cascade into. Oh, you can't play Mishra's Bauble, you can't play a lot of things that would help you turn on Delirium. So if you can jump over the hurdle of turning on Delirium, it's a very powerful card. I'm just not sure how easy it's going to be to actually clear that hurdle. At the same time, like, even in the worst case scenario, you can play this like a weird Bloodbraid Elf, essentially, like a cheaper Bloodbraid Elf, and if you're cascading into Ignoble Hierarch or Noble Hierarch or Lightning Bolt, that's still fine. It's not as explosive as I got you with Crashing Footfalls or whatever. So if you turn on Delirium, this card is very good. I'm just not sure it's going to be easy enough to turn on Delirium to make it work. Delirium has proven to be tricky to turn on, even in Modern, so we'll have to wait and see. If you can get over the Delirium hurdle, really good 2-drop. If not, pretty bad 2-drop. We also got a absolutely absurd number of lore rarity cards. And we can't talk about all of them. You can see them all over at MTGPreviews.com. But there are a few I wanted to mention individually, starting with Power Storage. So Power Storage, another artifact land, comes into play tapped, adds colorless. You can add a mana of any color, but spend it only to cast artifact spells or activate artifact abilities. But it has modular 1, so it's going to have a +1/+1 counter. When it dies, you can put that counter on something else. We already see Llanowar Reborn, which is mostly a worse version, I think, of Power Storage. It's not an artifact, it only makes green mana. See play in Hardened Scale style deck, because you can put the counter on your Walking Ballista, let's say. I feel like Power Storage is a strict upgrade if you're playing something like Hardened Scales with Ravagers and Zabaz, or you just play it alongside Llanowar Reborn and have 2 times that effect. So I think that in very specific decks, Power Storage is going to be really good. Also in Commander, a 5-color land for an artifact deck is fine. Sure, it comes into play tapped, but if you're playing a 4 or 5-color artifact build in Commander, you can afford to get away with a tap land, especially with the upside of it itself being an artifact. So Hardened Scales, Ravager shenanigans, and some good mana fixing for budget Commander decks. We also got Chrome Courier, a 3-mana 1/1 Thopter with flying that when it comes into play, you reveal the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, the other goes to your graveyard. If an artifact was put in your hand, you get to gain 3 life. So this reminds me of Court Hussar, of Seagate Oracle. Downside is you lose some toughness. Upside is you gain a flyer and maybe some life. And even a bigger upside, the cards are going into your graveyard. The card you don't take, which in decks that might want this, like Blue-White Amiria or like Panharmonicon style shells, is actually a big upside. Having the card go in your graveyard is way, way better. So I don't think most decks would play this, but in Blue-White Amiria, in a Panharmonicon style deck, maybe some sort of Soul Herder style deck with more artifacts, Chrome Courier is a 3-drop to keep in mind. We also got another Merfolk 1-drop in Tide Shaper, and I think this one is actually pretty good. So 1-mana 1/1 Merfolk Wizard. It has Kicker of 1. When it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, you get to turn a land into an island for as long as it remains on the battlefield, and it gets +1/+1 as long as your opponent controls an island. So we also got Rishardan Dockhand, and when that was spoiled, we were talking about how the 1-drop slot is the weakest slot in Mono Blue Merfolk decks, and that Rishardan Dockhand is probably going to take that slot basically by default. Well, Tide Shaper, I think, might just be better. If you can kick it, you're getting like a pseudo Spreading Seas, where you're hating on your opponent's mana, you're getting an island for Island Walk, and thanks to all the island cards that you play in the deck, all the Spreading Seas effects in Seas Claim, your opponent should almost always have an island, and then you're getting a 1-mana 2/2, making it like a Kumana Speaker that doesn't make you go into green. So I feel like this might just be the new best 1-drop for a Merfolk deck. We'll have to see. Rishardan Dockhand does exist, but you really want your 1-drop to be attacking and beating down in Merfolk, so tapping your Dockhand is painful. Tide Shaper might do exactly what Merfolk wants in the 1-drop slot, so keep that one in mind for your modern Merfolk deck. We also got Skyblade's Boon. So 2-mana Aura. You enchant a creature, you give it +1/+1 in flying, and you can pay 3 mana to return it to your hand either from the battlefield or from your graveyard. So this reminds me a little bit of Gryff's Boon. Gryff's Boon is a card that often shows up as like a 1-of, 2-of in modern Boggles, to give your Boggle flying, to get in over your opponent's blockers. Skyblade's Boon, a bit more expensive. 2 mana to cast. It goes back to your hand for 3 mana from the graveyard rather than need to play for 4 mana like Gryff's Boon, so 1 more mana there. The upside is the 3 mana bounce back to your hand can do some shenanigans with Core Spirit Dancer. Let's say you're playing Boggles and you fizzle and you end up empty-handed, you don't have a way to trigger your Spirit Dancer. Worst case, you can pick your Skyblade's Boon up from the battlefield, recast it, draw another card, maybe start your Boggly or a chain going again. So whether or not this actually beats out Gryff's Boon, not sure. Modern does value efficiency, but there are some upside to Skyblade's Boon over Gryff's Boon for modern Boggles. We also got Vile Gravedigger, 4-drop, 2/2 in black, Zombie Warlock, Death Touch. When it enters the battlefield, you entomb. You search for a card, put it in your graveyard. So this is 4-mana creature or tomb. 4-mana creature or tomb, probably not going to be fast enough for modern. Almost certainly not. But if you're playing a Reanimator commander deck, Chain Chainer, Madroltha, Carador, the Mimeoplasm. In those decks, I think this is essentially an auto-include. You can get it back from your graveyard with creature reanimation, tutor up something better, get that in your graveyard. So it seems very synergistic for any sort of reanimator commander deck, but just a tiny bit too slow for Modern. We also got Tireless Provisioner, which is pretty interesting. 3 mana, 3/2 with landfall. When a land enters a battlefield under your control, you get a food token or a treasure token. So essentially a tireless tracker that never grows, but instead of making clues, makes food or treasures, which kind of makes it like a 3 mana Lotus Cobra, which adding Lotus Cobra to Tireless Provisioner together can do some scary things. If you have 2 Lotus Cobra effects out, a Rampant Growth is essentially free. A Growth Spile is free. It costs 2 mana, but you're going to get back that 2 mana right away. And in many ways, Tireless Provisioner is a better Lotus Cobra because your treasure tokens are going to stick around. You don't have to use that mana right away, so you can make some land drops, play some fetch lands, store up some mana for the future, which has potential, just like Tireless Dragger. If you can wait a turn and play this on 4 and immediately fetch and crack a fetch, those 2 treasure tokens are really going to ramp you in the coming turns. And then worst case, you make some food if you're about to die against Burn, which gave me a little incidental life. Not relevant in every matchup, but when it matters, it really matters. So I would guess that Tireless Provisioner, a little bit worse than Tireless Tracker, but it also has way more combo potential, because in the right deck, making extra mana in the form of treasure tokens can definitely be more powerful than just making clues that draw you cards. We also got Foundation Breaker, which is like the green elementally artifact or enchantment-y version of Shriekmaw. 4 mana 2/2. You can evoke it for 2. When it enters the battlefield, destroy an artifact or enchantment. So very Shriekmaw-esque. I think this is a card that is going to show up in a lot of commander decks. Probably just better than like Reclamation Sage. You can evoke it on the cheap if you want to. Worst case, you can play it alongside Reclamation Sage, but seems like a new commander all-star that maybe has some potential for Modern thanks to the evoke cost. If having a body really matters to your deck, this does go up in value. Otherwise, there's plenty of artifact and enchantment hate in the format, so if you don't specifically care about the body, it's less interesting. But if you're elementals or something, could have a shot as a sideboard card in Modern too. Finally today, in the world of new to Modern reprints, we got a few good ones, starting with Shardless Agent, just a 3-drop Simic 2/2 that cascades when it comes into play. This is a card that used to see a lot of legacy play, where you could like brainstorm, Jace, put a free spell like Ancestral Visions on the top of your deck, Shardless Agent, get it for free. We don't have all the pieces to do that, at least efficiently in Modern. You do it with Jace, but there's no brainstorm in Modern. But Shardless Agent is still a really powerful effect if you're trying to cheat Living Ends or Crashing Footfalls into play. I think this is just the new best 3-mana Cascade spell, plus it's just a decent value creature. Now that we have Shardless Agent and also Bloodbraid Elf, maybe we see some sort of like Teamer Cascade or 4-color Jund style deck where you're just playing some mana dorks and then using your Bloodbraids and Shardless Agents to cascade into random Jund stuff like Targum Goyf and Dark Confidant. So definitely a solid value creature. We'll see how effective it is in Modern. I think it's definitely good enough to see play, but in some ways it does look a little bit fair unless you're cheating one of those broken no mana cross free spells into play. In that case, Shardless Agent going to be absolutely absurd. We also got Chainer Nightmare Adept, Commander Brigade All-Star, 4 mana 3/2 human minion. You can discard a card, and that allows you to cast a creature spell from your graveyard this turn, only do it once a turn, and when a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if you didn't cast it from your hand, it gains haste. So Chainer, I don't think it's going to make it in Modern. 4 mana for a 3/2 is asking a lot, and then you got to untap with it most of the time to really get value out of its ability, because you're going to need mana to cast whatever you're casting from your graveyard. If it does have a chance, maybe it's some sort of Madness style deck with like Asmore, Fiery Temper, Voldaren Pria, Blazing Root Walla, being able to like cheat a Voldaren Pria into play with Madness. And Madness, remember, you're casting from exile, so it's not going from your hand, so it is going to get haste or hasting and Blazing Root Wallas. That does seem pretty powerful, so maybe it could be like a 1 or 2 of at the top end of a Madness curve. Otherwise, I think it's just a tiny bit too slow, a tiny bit too expensive to really take off in Modern. When you consider we have stuff like Persist that just straight up lets you reanimate a non-legend for 2 mana, The appeal of Chainer, I just don't know if it's there as a reanimation card. So maybe in Madness, otherwise, probably just not quite there for Modern. We also got Cursed Totem, and this is a card I think is going to have a huge impact as a sideboard hate card in Modern. 2-mana artifact. This says activated abilities of creatures can't be activated. So this is Linvala, Keeper of Silence, on a 2-mana artifact. Linvala has kind of fallen out of favor in Modern. It used to see a lot of play, but it's 4 mana. That's pretty slow for what it's hating on. When you consider what Cursed Totem can do, on level 1, it shut down all mana dorks, which is pretty good against elves. We got Ignoble Hierarch joining Noble Hierarch. There's plenty of mana dork decks in the format, but more exciting, Cursed Totem shuts down creature combos, and there is a huge list. Like Heliad Walking Ballista, can't win through Cursed Totem. The Goblins combos, going infinite with Kiki Jiki and Snoop, that's not going to work. Straight up Kiki Jiki combos, which might get better thanks to some of our new cards from Modern Horizons like Imperial Recruiter, can't work. Elves deck does nothing. Vizier Devoted Druid does nothing. So there's actually a ton of top tier decks where Cursed Totem is going to be somewhere between really good and great. Like, you can't win until you get this off the battlefield great. So I think that Cursed Totem might be a new sideboard all-star. It'll obviously depend on the meta. When creature combos are high in the meta, mana dork decks are high in the meta, it'll see more play. When they kind of fall back down, it'll see less play. But definitely a sweet new safety bell fate card for Modern sideboards. We also got Riptide Laboratory and Riptide Lab. Oh, I love this card. A land that makes colorless mana also lets you pay 1 and a blue, tap it to bounce a wizard to your hand. There was a time when this actually saw legacy play, where you can keep picking up your Snapcaster to flashback something else. Keep picking up your Vendilion Click to Thoughtseize your opponent, and I think it can do something similar in Modern. In Modern, there's a couple of different possibilities. It seems great in like Naban or Harmonic Prodigy Wizards deck, like Panharmonicon Wizards, where you are playing all these like ETB, Merfolk Tristers, Reflector Mages, Watcher of Tomorrows, and this is just a way that you can pick up your Watcher of Tomorrow, get your Hideaway cards, play it again, double trigger it with Naban or Harmonic Prodigy, do it again, or lock a creature out of the game for several turns with Reflector Mage, again and again and again. It's not fast, but if you can get this set up, it's incredibly powerful. And maybe the scariest thing about this card is it does set up some pretty easy counter spell locks. Like, let's say you have Riptide Laboratory, 7 mana, you got Venser. Every single turn you Venser your opponent's thing, pick up your Venser, do it again, do it again. Frilled Mystic can counter things. Even Spellstutter Sprite, a much cheaper version, if you get some fairies out, can just lock your opponent out of really casting anything by bouncing it every single turn. So I think the Riptide Lab, while it only really works in Wizards, in a Wizard style deck, it is a very powerful effect because it comes attached to a land that comes into play untapped, so the opportunity cost is super low. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Modern Horizons 2 spoilers for today. So what do you think? What's your favorite card from today? Now that we're getting near the end of spoiler season, 2 days until we get the full set on Wednesday, what are you going to build first in Modern, in Commander, in Legacy? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for watching. Have an amazing day, or holiday if you're in the US, everyone. And I'll be back tomorrow with more Modern Horizons 2 spoilers. So until then, have an amazing day, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.